March 19th, 2024 meeting of the Greensboro City Council. We will begin tonight's meeting with a closed session. Mrs. Abusawader, would you read the motion?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move to go into closed session for the following purposes. First, to discuss matters relating to the location or expansion of industries or other businesses in the Greensboro area, including agreement on a tentative list of economic development incentives that may be offered. Two, to consider the qualifications, competence, performance, character, fitness, conditions of appointment, or conditions of initial employment of an individual public officer or employee or prospective public officer or employee. And three, to prevent the disclosure of information regarding a specific council employee personnel record that is privileged or confidential pursuant to North Carolina General Statute 160A to 168 and not considered a public record within the meaning of Chapter 132 of General Statutes.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
And that passes unanimously. We hope to be back at 5:30. Thank you.
Welcome to Gate City Insider. I'm Rosemary Plyben. Most of us are at least a little bit familiar with Greensboro's place in the history of the American Revolutionary War. General Nathanael Greene led about 4,500 American troops into battle against British General Lord Cornwallis and his force of about 2,500. A fierce fight with the British earning a slim victory, but leaving the British vulnerable, leading to a surrender at the Battle of Yorktown just a few months later. Many of us learned in school that that Battle of Guilford Courthouse was where America lost the battle but won the war. And today we can revisit our history at Guilford Courthouse National Military Park. Aaron LaRocca is superintendent of the park. He is here for a little walk through the park with us. Hello, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, glad to be here. We got to have a walk through the park in the fall, and so now we're going to share a little bit of that with folks. Let's talk first a little bit about you, though, because I'm interested. What was your road to becoming a park superintendent?
I appreciate the question. So I've been a National Park Service employee for about 18 years. I actually started as a volunteer. I was a history student at George Mason University, and a park ranger, volunteer coordinator, sent out a recruitment email. I had no idea what I was going to do with my career. I said, oh, maybe I'll try volunteering for the National Park Service. It worked out. At the time, the Park Service had a hiring authority. I was able to get a temporary position, turned into a permanent position. From there, I was a park ranger volunteer coordinator, getting to facilitate volunteer activities. It was one of my favorite times in my career, people giving of themselves, their time, their talent to help meet the mission of the National Park Service. Supervisory park ranger at Clara Barton National Historic Site in Glen Echo Park. All my time at the Park Service before coming to Greensboro was in a park outside of Washington, D.C. called the George Washington Memorial Parkway. My final assignment at the Parkway was I was the chief of staff supporting that superintendent with all our external facing responsibilities. I was the liaison to our nonprofit partners, congressional liaison, public information officer.
A lot of hats.
Quite literally a lot of hats, yes.
And so how did you end up here?
This job was announced, and in the National Park Service, people compete for jobs, so I was lucky enough to do okay on the interview. And then from there, the position was offered to me, so I've been here for about almost 2 years. It'll be 2 years in May of 2024.
Well, we're glad to have you. Had you, before you got involved as volunteering first with the parks, had you visited many national parks?
I grew up going to parks.
Okay,
yes.
good. Yes, so, it was a thing.
There's a program in national parks where you can get your passport stamped. And so my family grew up doing that, and I ended up working in some of those parks where I got my passport stamped.
That is cool.
So, yeah, I got a passport stamp for Clara Barton National Historic Site in 1988. And then 20 years later, I was working there as a supervisory park ranger.
Did you have one for here, though?
I did, for my first day on the job.
Yes,
first day on the job
you got it. You still have the passport?
I do, yes.
Oh,
It's our family
super fun.
book, so it has, nearly 40 years worth of visiting national parks.
That is a great story. I love that. Okay, let's go back a little bit further in history,
Sure.
past when you were a little boy.
Okay.
And talk about what Greensboro was like in the late 1700s.
So no Greensboro. So at the time of the Battle of Guilford Courthouse, Guilford County was a new county within the state of North Carolina, and there was a small town, Martinsville, that was on a road. The road that we now call New Garden Road was known as Salisbury Road, and there was a courthouse there with a small hamlet of about 50 residents at the time of the Battle of Guilford Courthouse, 8 miles from what is now present-day downtown Greensboro.
Okay, so it looked a little bit different,
A
you're
little
saying.
bit different, for sure.
So set the stage for the battle just a little bit. What led to really this confrontation between General Greene and Cornwallis?
Sure, so this is the Southern campaign of the American Revolutionary War. Most people associate the Revolutionary War with the Northeast, but there was a Southern campaign primarily focused around Charleston, where the British Army, led by General Cornwallis, was seeking to gain support, supplies, resources for their war effort in an attempt to break apart the colonies, essentially to divide and conquer. So General George Washington sends General Nathaniel Greene down to confront Cornwallis as part of the Southern campaign, and they, for lack of a better description, chase each other around the North Carolina and South Carolina countryside and have a number of conflicts, the most significant conflict being here outside of Greensboro, or present-day Greensboro, at the Battle of Guilford Courthouse.
Okay, and so what did that look like? What are some stories from that actual battle?
So the main takeaway was this defense in-depth strategy used by General Nathaniel Greene. It was a strategy that the Continentals, or the Americans, had used early in the war to great success, and they used it here at Guilford Courthouse. It was Greene's idea to line up his most inexperienced troops in the front line. There was 3 lines, so the first line would have been the most experienced troops. The most well-trained troops, the regulars, would have been on that 3rd line. And what happens is the British essentially slam into these defensive positions, and because of the defensive positions, the Americans, the Continentals, are able to inflict a lot of casualties on the British. So the British push the Americans off the battlefield, but because of this defensive strategy, all those casualties, which then later leads to the surrender of General Cornwallis to General Washington at Yorktown.
You know, it's hard for us to kind of get a view or an idea of like what battles were like, and like how long did this last?
Oh yeah, it's about 2.5 hours.
Yeah, I mean, so it wasn't days and days.
That's right,
months,
and it's a series of conflicts. So there's a number of conflicts that are part of this southern campaign. That the Battle of Guilford Courthouse is just the largest. So people are familiar with Cowpens or Kings Mountain. Earlier in the war, there was a battle at Morris Creek, which is another National Park Service site also located in North Carolina. So there were a number of conflicts within the Revolutionary War in North and South Carolina, but Battle of Guilford Courthouse was the definitive one of the Southern campaign.
Right. Okay, so immediately after the battle, immediately after the war, were there any efforts to kind of preserve or mark the area of this battle?
No, it's nearly forgotten about until 100 years later, when a man named Judge David Schenck comes to Greensboro and wants to essentially redeem the battlefield from oblivion. And so as a private citizen, he purchases the first land. He also starts a nonprofit organization called Guilford